absolute power. It is one of the most dangerous tests in human history. If a person is given unlimited authority, will they make the world a better place, or will they become a slave to their own dark passions? Perhaps one of the most terrifying answers in Roman history is Caligula, the third emperor, whose name is synonymous with madness, passion, and cruelty. Caligula, whose real name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, was born in 12 AD. His family belonged to one of the most illustrious and noble dynasties of the Roman Empire. His father, Germanicus, was a legendary general in the eyes of the people. His mother was Agrippina, the granddaughter of Emperor Augustus. Thus, from the moment he was born, Caligula grew up in the shadow of the Roman throne, at the center of power and splendor. However, this splendor would soon be overshadowed by darkness, and little Gaius's life would be plunged into tragedy. He spent his childhood in legion camps with his father's army. When he was just a few years old, soldiers dressed him in a small suit of armor and miniature sandals. This sight was so adorable and ironic that the soldiers jokingly gave him the nickname Caligula, meaning little boot. Who could have known that this innocent, even endearing-looking nickname would later become one of the most terrifying names in Roman history? The first major tragedy in Caligula's life began with the death of his father, Germanicus. Germanicus was the darling of the empire. He had won the affection of the people with his victories on the battlefield. However, in 19 AD, while in Syria, he suddenly fell ill and died shortly thereafter. Rumors quickly spread that his death was not natural and that he may have been poisoned. The target of these rumors was Emperor Tiberius. This was because Germanicus was one of the strongest candidates for the Roman throne and threatened Tiberius's position. When news of Germanicus' death reached Rome, the people mourned in the streets. People wrote "Give us back Germanicus" on the walls, and a wave of anger was growing in the city. But Tiberius kept his cool. Agrippina claimed her husband had been poisoned, but the consequences were severe. Tiberius exiled Agrippina. Caligula's two older brothers were either imprisoned or forced to commit suicide. Little Caligula was suddenly left without a father, mother, or brothers. Only his three sisters remained. Agrippina, the younger, Julia Livilla, and his favorite, Julia Drusilla. His life from then on would take him down a completely different path. When he turned 19, Tiberius summoned him to his villa on the island of Capri. Capri boasted magnificent scenery, but rumors whispered that it was an island of pleasure and torment. Tiberius' villa was not only a center of splendor, but also of blood and depravity. According to sources, countless young women and men were sacrificed to the emperor's entertainment here. It is said that people were thrown off the cliffs, extending into the sea, and tortures were turned into spectator entertainment. Caligula grew up in this environment. He remained silent, hid his feelings, but saw everything. His greatest weapon was his silence. Tiberius' men often asked him questions about his family, trying to provoke his anger. But Caligula said nothing. Even Tiberius had begun to be frightened by his patient and cool-headed demeanor. He even hinted that he would be dangerous in the future, saying, "I am raising a snake for the Roman people." And the moment arrived. In March of 37 AD, Tiberius died. According to some accounts, Caligula had a hand in his death. It was said that he may have strangled the emperor. The truth was never confirmed, but the outcome was clear. The emperor was dead, and Rome now had to choose a new leader. And for the people, there was no more suitable candidate than Caligula, the son of Germanicus. He was only 24 years old, but the streets of Rome echoed with his victory cries. The people had embraced Germanicus' son after the cruel Tiberius. For them, this young emperor represented hope. After Tiberius' oppressive rule, Caligula seemed like a savior. Rome welcomed him like a hero. Songs were sung in the streets, and enthusiastic celebrations were held. But history has shown that many stories that began with hope quickly turned into nightmares. And Caligula's story was exactly that. The Roman people celebrated his accession to the throne like a festival. But within a few years, the same people would associate his name with fear, tyranny, and madness. The Roman people welcomed their young emperor as a savior. After years of Tiberius' dictatorship, the accession of Caligula, son of Germanicus, had created an almost festive atmosphere. He was only 24 years old. His youth, energy, and the prestige of his lineage gave the Roman people great hope. In the first months of his reign, he truly painted a different picture. He abolished Tiberius' oppressive practices. He returned unjustly confiscated property to its owners. He lowered taxes and increased soldiers' salaries. He organized grand feasts, games, and gladiator fights for the people. The streets of Rome were filled with festivities. People said, "This is the emperor we've been waiting for." Senate members were initially pleased. Caligula presented a harmonious image with them in his early days. He had the profile of an emperor, beloved by both the people and the aristocracy. An atmosphere of optimism, unseen in Rome for a long time, had taken hold. People looked to the future with confidence. But this optimism was short-lived. In the autumn of 37 AD, Caligula suddenly fell seriously ill. He writhed in fever for days. Anxiety grew in the palace and throughout the city. People flocked to the temples, praying to the gods. Some senators even made vows to the gods, begging, "Take our lives instead of his." The Roman people waited tearfully for the young emperor's death. But a miracle happened. Caligula returned from the brink of death. Yet the whispers in the palace were, "The Caligula who has returned to us is no longer the old Caligula." After his recovery, a sharp change in his personality was observed. The young emperor, once beloved by the people, quickly turned into a frightening figure. First, he summoned the senators, who had made offerings to the gods during his illness. Smiling at them, he said, "I am healed. When will you fulfill your promise? When will you die?" Behind this question lay a deadly seriousness. The result was horrific. The senators were forced to commit suicide. The Roman people were stunned. Caligula now saw not only power, but life itself as a game. He became fascinated with disguises. Sometimes he wore the clothes of the gods. Sometimes he roamed the palace in women's clothing. Those who saw him were both astonished and terrified. For behind these games lay a growing threat. The emperor's whims were more valuable than the lives of everyone in Rome. He treated women ruthlessly. He would select the wives of senators at banquets right before their eyes, take them to his room, and force himself on them. He would then send the woman back to her husband and mockingly remark, "She wasn't very good." These scenes both humiliated and horrified the Roman aristocracy. His sexual appetite knew no bounds. Some sources claim he had an incestuous relationship with his sister, Drusilla. Drusilla was not just an ordinary woman in his eyes, but almost a divine being. He carried her with him like his wife and made the army swear allegiance in her name. When Drusilla died, he went mad, declared her a goddess, and forced the people to worship her. But it wasn't just sexuality. Sadism had also become a part of his life. He watched executions as if they were an enjoyable game. He ordered the executioners not to kill the prisoners immediately, but to make them suffer as much as possible. Sometimes he would bring their families along, have their children killed in front of them, and even expect the parents to smile, because the slightest sign of grief meant a death sentence for them too. This new side of Caligula quickly turned Rome into a reign of terror. He was no longer just a ruler, but a tyrant who proclaimed himself a god. He merged his palace with temples and erected statues of himself throughout the city. He ordered sacrifices to be made to him in the temples. Until a few months ago, the Roman people had been praising him to the skies. Now, however, the same people spoke his name with fear. After his illness, the emperor seemed to have become a different person. Caligula, affectionately called Little Boot as a child, had now become the most feared face in Rome. Caligula was no longer just a ruler. He had declared himself a god. He erected statues of himself in Rome's most sacred temples, and ordered the Senate to recognize his divine nature. In the eyes of the people, the emperor behaved like a living god. But this divinity was not the beginning of a new era for Rome, but the beginning of a catastrophe. The emperor's increasingly erratic behavior grew worse with each passing day. One day, he recalled an old prophecy. Caligula's chance of becoming emperor is as likely as a horse crossing the sea. To mock this prophecy, he gathered hundreds of ships from different regions of Italy. He used these ships to build a massive bridge over the Bay of Naples. He then rode his horse back and forth across this bridge for 2 days, presenting himself as a hero. However, this spectacle caused Rome to suffer a severe grain shortage. On another occasion, he led his army to the shores of the English Channel to conquer Britain. The soldiers were expecting a great battle, but Caligula ordered his soldiers to collect seashells, declaring, "We have won a great victory over the sea god Neptune." He proclaimed these shells to be war booty. Upon returning to Rome, he celebrated them as an imperial victory by displaying the shells to the Senate. For him, power had become a theater detached from reality. At first, the people struggled to understand these actions. Then they began to watch in fear, because behind these jokes lay an ever-increasing savagery. Caligula depleted the state treasury. Lavish entertainment, ostentatious buildings, grandiose projects. When the money ran out, the solution was simple. He reinstated the treason trials that had been abolished during Tiberius' reign. These trials were really just a way to seize the property of the nobility. Selected individuals were tried on false charges. Their property was confiscated, and most were tortured to death. The streets of Rome began to run red with blood. Executions, tortures, confiscated fortunes. No one was safe. The wealthy tried desperately to curry favor with the emperor, while the common people hoped to survive simply by keeping quiet. Caligula's private life also became increasingly disturbing. He married Milonia Caesonia, who was considered just as immoral as he was. He valued her so much that he would parade her naked in front of his soldiers, even joking, "I could kill her at any moment." The couple had a daughter, but even this child was part of a sick obsession in the emperor's twisted mind. He named her after his deceased sister, Drusilla. All this caused great anger to build up in the Senate, among the Praetorian Guard, and among the people. For the emperor was now a slave not to Rome, but only to his own lusts and follies. Finally, whispers of rebellion echoed within the walls of the Praetorian Guard. Cassius Chaerea was their leader. Caligula had often mocked and humiliated him. He would question Chaerea's masculinity, calling him high-pitched like a woman, and laugh in his face. Chaerea was now determined to put an end to this humiliation. The date was January 24, 41. Caligula was leaving the games held on the Palatine Hill. He was tired, but still walked with confident steps. A group of guards approached him. Cassius Chaerea was at their head. Ignoring Caligula's smile, they drew their swords. The first blows staggered the emperor, and then, with dozens of successive stabs, the young emperor collapsed to the ground. At the time, he was only 28 years old. Rome's most feared man had died at the hands of his own guards. The guards then killed the emperor's wife, Milonia Caesonia, and their young daughter. The screams echoing through the streets of Rome announced the end of a dynasty. Caligula's statues were destroyed. His name was erased from monuments. Rome wanted to wipe out his memory, but history did not forget him, because Caligula, even with his reign lasting only 4 years, was etched into memory as one of the most striking examples of how absolute power leads to absolute corruption. Even today, the name Caligula evokes madness, passion, and cruelty. His story serves as a warning not only for Rome, but for all of humanity, without limits on power. Man can easily become a monster,